in the snowy heart of St. Lys, a French alpine village. A skating festival turns deadly when Elise Dubois, a radiant star, is found dead on a frozen lake, a bullet in her temple. Hercule Poirot, the master detective, steps into a web of secrets. A jealous rival, a secretive coach, and an obsessive spectator. A silent shot, a mysterious groove in the ice, and a hidden doping scandal unravel a chilling murder. As Poirot's little gray cells piece together the clues, one question burns: who killed Elise, and why? Dive into the frozen lake mystery, where betrayal glides beneath the ice, and truth emerges in a heart-stopping confession. Chapter 1. The icebound corpse. The village of St. Lys, nestled in a quiet valley of the French Alps. Its snow-draped chalets, glowing faintly under a weak winter sun. The frozen lake at its center, a mirror of ice polished by the wind, was alive with the annual skating festival, a tradition that drew skaters and spectators from across the region. Hercule Poirot, his small frame swathed in a meticulously tailored overcoat and a scarf knotted with geometric precision, stood on the lake's snowy bank. His sharp green eyes, undimmed by the chill, surveyed the scene with a mixture of curiosity and detachment. He had arrived at the insistence of Inspector Giraud, who had promised a restful retreat from the clamor of Paris, a holiday. Poirot, Giraud had said, his mustache bristling with enthusiasm. No mysteries, just mulled wine and skating. But Poirot, whose faith in human nature was tempered by experience, suspected that tranquility was rarely so simple. The lake was a spectacle of motion and color. Skaters in vibrant costumes carved elegant patterns on the ice, their blades hissing softly, while villagers in thick woolens clapped and cheered from makeshift stands. A gramophone blared a lively waltz, its notes echoing off the surrounding pines. Poirot, who had no intention of skating the ice, it is not for Hercule Poirot, sipped a cup of chocolate chaud, its warmth seeping through his gloves. He was admiring the symmetry of a young skater's pirouette when a piercing scream shattered the festive air. A young woman in a fur-trimmed coat stood at the lake's edge, her gloved hand pointing toward the center of the ice. The crowd's murmurs fell silent, and Poirot's gaze followed her trembling finger. There, stark against the gleaming ice, lay a figure in a crimson skating costume, motionless. A dark stain spread beneath her head, black and ominous in the pale light. The music faltered, then stopped, and a collective gasp rose from the spectators. Poirot set down his cup, his holiday forgotten. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "It begins." Inspector Giraud, his face flushed from the cold and sudden urgency, pushed through the crowd and joined Poirot as they crossed the ice, their boots crunching with each careful step. A young constable trailed behind, his notebook already open. The victim was Elise Dubois, a skater of 22, whose grace and skill had made her the darling of St. Lys. Her golden hair fanned out on the ice, framing a face now frozen in death. A single bullet wound, neat and precise, pierced her temple, and her wide blue eyes stared unseeing at the gray sky. Giraud knelt beside the body, his breath clouding in the frigid air. A bullet wound, here, in the middle of a festival. This is no accident, Poirot. His voice carried the indignation of a man who disliked complications. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, studied the scene with meticulous care. The ice around Elise was pristine, unmarred by skate marks or scuffs, save for a faint, curious groove trailing away from the body like a whispered clue. He bent closer, his mustache twitching as he examined the wound. "The bullet, it is small caliber," he said softly, "and the angle straight, deliberate. Yet the ice, it tells us nothing of struggle. This is most singular." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the crowd, now gathered at a respectful distance. Faces pale with shock, some wet with tears, others merely curious, stared back. "Someone here," Poirot said, his voice low but clear, "knows more than they will say. We must find who had reason to end the life of Mademoiselle Dubois. Giraud stood, brushing snow from his knees. Reason, Elise was adored. Who would want her? Dead Poirot's eyes gleamed. Adoration, mon ami, is often the shadow of envy, or fear. We shall see. He turned to the constable. Ensure no one leaves the lake until we have spoken to them, and a body cover it, but disturb nothing. As the constable hurried to comply, Poirot's mind began its quiet work, arranging the facts like pieces on a chessboard. A young woman, struck down in her prime, on a stage of ice, where all eyes were upon her. A shot fired, yet no one reported hearing it. A groove in the ice, leading nowhere, and a crowd of spectators, any one of whom might hide a secret. The little gray cells, as Poirot called them, were already stirring. The mystery of the frozen lake had begun, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until its truth was laid bare. Chapter 2. The Rivals, the Village Hall of St. Lys. A sturdy stone building with a steeply pitched roof had been hastily repurposed into a somber hub of investigation by the time the winter sun dipped below the pines. Its wooden beams, usually festooned with garlands for the skating festival, now cast long shadows across the room, where trestle tables and mismatched chairs formed an impromptu headquarters. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of one such table, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings. His black patent leather shoes gleamed under the flickering light of a chandelier, and his notebook lay open before him, its pages pristine save for the neat, deliberate strokes of his pen. Inspector Giraud, his face etched with the strain of a case that threatened to overshadow the festival, paced nearby, his heavy boots thudding against the worn floorboards. A fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill of murder that hung over the room. Poirot's arrival in St. Lys had been meant as a respite, a chance to indulge in the simple pleasures of a provincial festival at Giraud's insistence. Yet, as he surveyed the hall, its walls lined with posters of past skating champions, their smiles frozen in time, he knew that fate had other plans. The death of Elise Dubois, the village's golden skater, was no mere tragedy. It was a puzzle, and Poirot's little gray cells were already aligning the pieces. The bullet wound, the undisturbed ice, the curious groove trailing from the body all pointed to a killer who was both bold and meticulous. But it was the human element, the tangle of motives and passions, that intrigued him most. The heart, mon ami, he had said to Giraud as they left the lake. It is the heart that betrays the hand. Giraud, less inclined to philosophical musings, had summoned the primary suspects to the hall for questioning. The festival had been confined to a smaller rink, and the villagers, though shaken, carried on with their celebrations, as if determined to defy the specter of death. Poirot, however, was focused. We must begin with those closest to Mademoiselle Dubois, he said, his voice soft but commanding. Who had reason to wish her harm? Who stood to gain from her death? Giraud nodded, producing a list scribbled on official stationery. 3 stand out, he said. Marie Lefebvre, her rival. Henry Vallon, her coach. And Paul Renaud, a local man who followed her like a shadow. Each was at the lake when it happened. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his interest. Bon, let us meet them, one by one, and observe the little details. The truth, it hides in the glance, the gesture, the word unspoken. The first to enter was Marie Lefebvre, a petite woman of 24, whose delicate frame belied the fire in her dark eyes. Her skating costume, a deep emerald green, clung to her like a second skin, and her chestnut hair was pulled back in a severe bun, accentuating the sharp angles of her face. She carried herself with the poise of a dancer, but there was a brittleness to her movements, as if she were holding herself together by sheer will. She sat across from Poirot, her hands folded tightly in her lap, and fixed him with a defiant stare. Mademoiselle Lefebvre, Poirot began, his tone courteous but probing. You were the rival of Elise Dubois Nan. 3 years you have skated in her shadow, always the second, never the first. That must have been trying. Marie's lips tightened, and a flush crept up her neck. Elise was talented, she said, her voice clipped. But she wasn't invincible. She had her tricks, her ways of winning. I didn't need to kill her, to beat her. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Tricks, you say? What manner of tricks? Marie hesitated, her fingers twisting a stray thread on her sleeve. She was too perfect, she said, at last. Always landing her jumps, always charming the judges. Some said she had help, but I don't know anything about that. Her voice wavered, and she looked away, toward the fire. Poirot noted the hesitation, the flicker of doubt, in her eyes. And where were you, mademoiselle, when the shot was fired? The scream, it came at what time? 3 o'clock, perhaps. I was on the ice, Marie replied quickly, practicing my routine. The lake was crowded, skaters, spectators, everyone moving. I heard the scream, but not the shot. The music was too loud. She met his gaze again, her chin lifting. I didn't see anything. I was focused on my spins. Poirot's pen scratched softly against his notebook. Focused, oui. But the eyes, they see even when the mind is elsewhere. Did you notice anyone near Mademoiselle Dubois? A figure, perhaps, moving strangely. Marie shook her head, but the motion was too quick, too emphatic. No one. It was chaos out there. She stood abruptly, as if eager to escape. I've told you all I know, Monsieur Poirot. May I go? Poirot inclined his head, his smile polite but enigmatic. For now, mademoiselle? But we shall speak again? As she left, her footsteps echoing in the hall, he murmured to Giraud, she knows more than she says. The rivalry, it runs deep. Next came Henry Vallon, a man whose broad shoulders and weathered face spoke of a life spent in pursuit of excellence. At 42, he was a legend in St. Lys, having coached a generation of skaters to regional glory. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and his eyes, a pale blue, held a guarded intensity. He wore a heavy wool sweater, its sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and his hands moved restlessly as he sat. Poirot observed the faint tremor in those hands, a detail that did not escape him. Monsieur Vallon Poirot, said his voice, smooth as velvet, you were the architect of Elise Dubois's success. A coach of your caliber, he must know his pupil intimately. Tell me, what was she like? Vallon's jaw tightened, but his tone was steady. Elise was exceptional. Disciplined, determined, but headstrong. She wanted to skate her own way, not always mine. We had our disagreements, but she was like a daughter to me. I'd never harm her. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Disagreements, you say? Over what, precisely? Vallon shrugged, but the gesture was stiff. Choreography, training schedules. She thought she knew better sometimes, but that's normal with young athletes. Poirot's gaze drifted to a small leather satchel on the table beside Vallon, its surface worn but meticulously maintained. And your whereabouts, monsieur, at the time of the murder? I was in the warming tent, Vallon said, his voice firm, going over the competition schedule with the organizers. I came out when I heard the scream. Poirot made a note, his pen moving with deliberate care. The warming tent, it is near the Lake Nan, yet you heard no shot. Vallon shook his head. The music was blaring, and the tent walls are thick. I heard nothing until the scream. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. You are a man of discipline, Monsieur Vallon. Yet discipline can mask other things, secrets, perhaps. What did you fear from Elise? Vallon's eyes flashed, but he controlled himself. I feared nothing. She was my star. Her success was mine. He stood, his movements abrupt. I have nothing more to say. As Vallon left, Poirot's gaze lingered on the satchel. A man so composed, he said to Giraud, yet his hands betray him. There is something he does not wish us to know. The final suspect was Paul Renaud, a local man of 30, whose wiry frame and nervous demeanor set him apart from the robust villagers of St. Lys. His dark hair was unkempt, and his fingers fidgeted with a scarf as he sat, his eyes darting between Poirot and Giraud. He wore a threadbare coat, its buttons mismatched, and his boots were caked with snow, as if he had been wandering the village aimlessly. Poirot, ever attentive to appearances, noted the man's unease and the faint flush on his cheeks. "Monsieur," Renaud Poirot began, his tone gentle but probing, "you were a great admirer of Mademoiselle Dubois, were you not? Some might say devoted." Paul's flush deepened. "I admired her skating," he said, his voice high and strained. "She was extraordinary. I went to every competition, every practice, but I didn't know her personally." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Yet you were seen often near her, monsieur, at the lake, in the village, always watching. That is more than admiration, perhaps." Paul's hands twisted the scarf tighter. I wanted to see her skate. She was like an angel on the ice. I was in the crowd when it happened. I saw her fall, but I didn't hear a shot. The music was too loud." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "And where, precisely, were you standing? Near the edge of the lake, perhaps?" Paul hesitated, his gaze flickering to the floor. "Yes, near the edge. I was trying to get a better view, but I didn't see anything unusual." Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. "Nothing unusual, monsieur. Yet a young woman lies dead, and you, her devoted follower, see nothing. That is most curious." Paul's face crumpled, and he stood, clutching his scarf. "I didn't do anything. I loved watching her, that's all." He hurried from the room, leaving a trail of melting snow on the floor. Giraud snorted. "A nervous one, that Renaud. Obsessed, maybe, but a killer. I'm not so sure." Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. "Do not be so quick to judge, mon ami. Obsession, it can lead to dark places. But so can rivalry, and so can fear. Each of these three, Marie, Val and Renaud, has a motive, however hidden, and the method." He paused, his eyes distant. "A shot fired in a crowded place, yet unheard. A body on the ice, yet no struggle. We must look closer." Giraud frowned. "Closer? We've questioned them all. What more is there?" Poirot rose, adjusting his scarf with precision. "The little details, mon ami. The glance that lingers. The word unspoken, the hand that trembles. They tell us more than words." He moved toward the door, his steps measured. "Come, let us return to the lake. The ice, it has secrets to share." As they stepped into the biting cold, the festival's music drifted faintly from the smaller rink, a reminder of the life that continued despite death. Poirot's mind was a whirl of impressions: Marie's defiance, Valen's guarded composure, Paul's nervous devotion. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. The groove in the ice, the silent shot, the pristine surface around Elise's body, these were clues that demanded answers, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, knew that the answers lay not only in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. Chapter 3. The silent shot. The morning after Elise Dubois's murder, the village of St. Lys awoke to a sky heavy with the promise of snow. The frozen lake, now cordoned off with ropes and guarded by a solemn constable, lay silent. Its surface, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned to the chin and his hat tilted at a precise angle, stood at the lake's edge, his breath forming delicate clouds in the frigid air. Inspector Giraud, ever practical, had suggested they begin the day with a review of the autopsy report, but Poirot insisted on returning to the scene of the crime. "The lake, mon ami," he had said, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "It is the stage where the drama was played. We must understand its secrets." The festival had been relegated to a smaller rink at the village's edge, and the distant strains of a violin mingled with the murmurs of villagers who lingered near the barriers. Their curiosity undimmed by the cold Poirot's attention, however, was fixed on the ice. He paced slowly along the cordoned area, his polished shoes crunching against the snow-dusted ground. The spot where Elise had been found was marked by a chalk outline, its stark, white lines a grim contrast to the ice's glassy sheen. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the surface, careful not to disturb it. The ice was smooth, almost polished, save for the faint groove he had noted the previous day, a thin, deliberate mark that trailed from the chalk outline toward the lake's western edge. "Regardez Giraud," Poirot said, pointing to the groove. "It is too fine for escape blade, too straight for an accident. This mark, it was made with intent. Perhaps a tool, or something dragged across the ice to mislead us." Giraud, bundled in a heavy scarf, crouched beside him, his brow furrowed. A tool, but why? To move the body, perhaps. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. Perhaps, mon ami. Or perhaps to create the illusion of movement, where there was none. "We must follow this groove to its end." With the constable's help, they traced the mark across the ice, their steps careful to avoid marring the surface. The groove led to a cluster of snow-laden pines at the lake's edge, where it abruptly vanished into a drift of powdery snow. Poirot knelt again, sifting through the snow with gloved hands, until he uncovered a small, frozen patch of earth. "Here," he said, his voice low. The killer stood. But what did they leave behind? He searched the area, his eyes sharp, but found no further clues. The snow, disturbed by wind and footprints, offered no clear answers. Giraud straightened, his frustration evident. "This tells us nothing, Poirot. A groove, a patch of earth, what does it mean? And the shot? How could a gunshot go unheard?" In a crowd, Poirot rose, brushing snow from his gloves. "The shot, it is the heart of the mystery. A bullet fired in daylight, yet no one hears it. This suggests a method most ingenious." He paused, his gaze distant. "We must consider the impossible, Giraud. A silencer, perhaps, or a shot timed with precision to mask its sound." Giraud's eyes widened. "A silencer? In St. Lys? That's not something you'd find in a village like this." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "And yet, mon ami, we must not assume. The impossible often hides the truth. Let us speak with the one who controlled the sound of the festival, the music. It may hold the key." They returned to the village hall, where Poirot requested the presence of Claude Moreau, the festival's sound technician. Claude, a lanky youth of 19 with a mop of unruly brown hair and a nervous habit of cracking his knuckles, arrived clutching a battered logbook. His eyes darted between Poirot and Giraud, as if expecting reprimand. Poirot, ever the master of putting others at ease, offered a reassuring smile. "Monsieur Moreau, you are the guardian of the festival's music. Non. Tell me, how did it function yesterday?" Claude relaxed slightly, his fingers stilling. "It's a simple setup," he said. "A gramophone with a stack of records, mostly waltzes and polkas. I keep it running from the sound booth near the lake, switching records when needed. The crowd loves it." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. "And yesterday, at the time of the murder, round 3 o'clock, was the music continuous?" Claude hesitated, flipping through his logbook. "Mostly." There was a pause, though, just before the scream. "I had to change the record. The skater's waltz was ending, and I put on a new one." The pause was short, maybe 10 seconds. Poirot's eyes gleamed. 10 seconds. A brief silence, yet long enough for a clever killer. "Did you notice anything unusual during this pause? A sound, perhaps, or a movement near the lake?" Claude shook his head, his knuckles cracking again. "Nothing. I was focused on the gramophone. The booth is at the lake's edge, but it's got wooden walls, and I was facing away from the ice. By the time I looked up, People were screaming. Poirot made a note in his book, his pen moving with deliberate precision. And the booth, it is near the pines at the western edge. Claude nodded. Right by them. You can see the whole lake from there, but I wasn't looking. Mercy, Monsieur Moreau, Poirot said, dismissing him. As Claude left, Poirot turned to Giraud. 10 seconds of silence. Giraud, enough time for a shot to be fired, its sound masked by the pause, or muffled by some device. And the booth, so close to where the groove ends, this is no coincidence. Giraud rubbed his chin, his skepticism warring with intrigue. You think the killer used the pause, but how did they get Elise to the center of the lake without being seen? Poirot's gaze was distant, his mind piecing together fragments. That, mon ami, is the question. The ice, it is smooth, yet the body was found far from the groove's end. Either the killer moved her, or he paused, his eyes narrowing, or the body was placed to deceive. We must examine the ice again, but first, let us consider the suspects. Back at the lake, Poirot and Giraud enlisted the young constable, Lefebvre, to assist in a second inspection. The air had grown colder, and a light snow began to fall, dusting the ice with fine crystals. Poirot focused on the area around the chalk outline, his magnifying glass catching the faint glint of the ice's surface. See here, he said, pointing to a series of tiny scratches near the outline, barely visible to the naked eye. These are not skate marks. They are too irregular, too shallow. Perhaps the killer used a tool to drag or position the body. Lefebvre, eager to prove himself, ventured a theory. Could it be a sled, monsieur? Something small, to move her quickly. Poirot's mustache twitched with approval. A possibility, gen homme, but a sled would leave broader marks. No, this is something finer, something precise. He stood, his gaze sweeping the lake. The killer, they planned every detail. The shot, the silence, the placement of the body, all to create confusion. Giraud, growing impatient, gestured toward the village. We're chasing shadows, Poirot. The suspects, Marie, Val and Renaud, they're our focus. One of them did this? Poirot nodded, but his expression was enigmatic. But which one? Marie, with her jealousy. Valen, with his secrets. Renaud, with his obsession. Or perhaps, someone we have not yet considered. The ice, it does not lie, but humans, they do. As they walked back to the hall, mind churned with possibilities. The groove, the pause, the scratches, all were clues, but they lacked context. The killer had orchestrated a murder in plain sight, yet left no witnesses, no sound. It was a puzzle worthy of Hercule Poirot, and he felt the familiar thrill of the chase. We must dig deeper, Giraud, he said, his voice firm. The truth, it is there, waiting for the little gray cells to uncover it. In the hall, Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open once more. He sketched the lake, marking the groove's path and the sound booth's position. The 10-second pause loomed, large in his thoughts, a window of opportunity for a killer who knew the festival's rhythm, but who among the suspects had the cunning, the knowledge, to exploit it. Marie, with her fierce ambition, Valen, with his disciplined mind, or Renaud, whose devotion might hide a darker intent. Poirot closed his eyes, letting the facts settle. The answer was close, but it required one more piece of spark to illuminate the shadows. Chapter 4. The Coach's Secret. The afternoon light in St. Lys had softened to a pale gray, the sky heavy with the threat of more snow. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat meticulously brushed and his mustache waxed to perfection, made his way through the village's narrow streets to the chalet of Henry Valen, the coach of the late Elise Dubois. The air was sharp with frost, and the distant hum of the skating festival, now confined to the smaller rink, carried faintly on the wind. Poirot's mind, however, was not on the music or the cold. It was fixed on the puzzle of the frozen lake, on the silent shot, the mysterious groove in the ice, and the three suspects whose motives swirled like snowflakes in his thoughts. Of them, Valen intrigued him most. The coach's steady demeanor and trembling hands had hinted at a secret, and Poirot was determined to uncover it. Valen's chalet stood at the edge of the village, a modest wooden structure with a steeply pitched roof and a chimney puffing smoke into the gathering dusk. Poirot knocked, his gloved hand precise, and the door opened to reveal Valen, his broad frame filling the doorway. The coach's face was guarded, his pale blue eyes narrowing as he recognized his visitor. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice gruff but polite. "I wasn't expecting you." Poirot inclined his head, his smile courteous but unyielding. "A detective, monsieur. He comes when least expected. May I enter?" "The cold? It is not kind to Hercule Poirot." Valen hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing toward a small sitting room warmed by a crackling fire. The room was Spartan, its walls adorned only with a few framed photographs of skaters mid-spin, their forms captured in moments of triumph. A pair of well-worn skates rested on a table, their blades gleaming from recent polishing, and beside them sat a leather satchel, its surface scuffed but meticulously maintained. Poirot's eyes lingered on the satchel, recalling its presence during their previous meeting, but he said nothing. Instead, he settled into a chair, his small frame dwarfed by the heavy oak, and fixed Valen with a penetrating gaze. "Monsieur Valen," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished ice, "you have told us that Elise Dubois was like a daughter. To you, a fine sentiment, yet I hear whispers of discord. Arguments, perhaps. Over what did you and Mademoiselle Dubois disagree?" Valen sat opposite, his hands resting on his knees, though Poirot noted the faint tremor that betrayed his calm. "Elise was stubborn," Valen said, his tone measured. "She wanted to change her routines, take risks I thought unwise. We clashed over her training, her music choices. But that's no crime. Every coach and pupil have their battles." Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his skepticism. "Battles oui, but not all battles end in death. Tell me, monsieur, was there something more? A matter, perhaps, that threatened more than your pride?" Valen's jaw tightened, and for a moment his eyes flickered to the satchel. "Nothing more," he said firmly. "Elise was my star. Her victories were mine. I had no reason to wish her harm." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "And yet, monsieur, the hands, they tremble. The eyes, they avoid. What do you keep in that satchel, so carefully guarded? Trophies of your success, or something less honorable?" Valen's face darkened, but he rose abruptly, moving to the satchel as if to protect it. "It's nothing. Personal items, training logs, letters, nothing to do with Elisa's death." Poirot's smile was faint, but knowing. "Personal items, you say, yet you guard them as a man guards a secret. Permit me to suggest, Monsieur Valen, that secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when blood has been spilled." Valen's hands clenched, but he said nothing, returning to his seat with a stiffness that spoke of unease. Poirot made a mental note of the satchel, its contents a mystery he resolved to unravel. He changed tack, his tone light but probing. "Your whereabouts? At the time of the murderer you were in the warming tent, preparing schedules, you said. Yet no one confirms this. Were you alone, monsieur?" Valen nodded, his expression guarded. "The organizers were in and out. But yes, I was alone for a time. I heard the scream and ran to the lake like everyone else." Poirot's pen scratched softly in his notebook. "Alone, in a tent so close to the lake, yet you heard no shot. Most curious." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You are a man of discipline, Monsieur Valen. A coach must be precise, methodical. Such a man might plan a deed with care, might he not?" Valen stood, his voice rising. "I've told you, I didn't kill her. Elise was everything to me. Accuse me if you must, but you'll find no proof. Poirot rose as well, his movements deliberate. Proof, monsieur, is what I seek, and I shall find it, with the aid of the little gray cells. He tipped his hat and left the chalet, the cold air a sharp contrast to the tension within. As he walked back to the village, his mind churned. Valen's defensiveness, the satchel, the tremor in his hands, these were threads in a tapestry not yet woven. Determined to pursue another lead, Poirot directed his steps to the village pharmacy, a small shop with a green-painted door and a sign reading Pharmacie du Bois. The name was a coincidence, no relation to Elise, but Poirot hoped its proprietor might shed light on Valen's secrets. Inside, the air was warm and scented with herbs, and Madame Dubois, a stout woman, with keen gray eyes, greeted him with a nod. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, wiping her hands on an apron. "The whole village speaks of you. Come about poor Elise, have you?" Poirot bowed slightly. "Indeed, madame, I seek the truth, and truth often hides in the smallest details. Tell me, have you had dealings with Monsieur Valen, the coach?" Madame Dubois's eyes sharpened, and she lowered her voice. "Henry Valen, he's been in often these past months. Nervous. He was always asking for sedatives. Said it was for his nerves. Coaching is stressful, he claimed, but I thought it odd. He bought enough to calm a horse, and he paid in cash. No questions." Poirot's interest quickened. "Sedatives, you say? And when was his last purchase?" 2 days before the festival," she replied, consulting a ledger. "A large bottle of chloral hydrate. I warned him to be careful, too much can be dangerous. He just nodded and left." Poirot's mind raced. Chloral hydrate as sedative? Yes, but in large doses. A potential tool for darker purposes. "Merci, Madame Dubois," he said, his tone warm but his thoughts elsewhere. "You have been most helpful." Outside, the snow had begun to fall in earnest, blanketing the village. In silence, Poirot stood for a moment, his eyes fixed on the distant lake, its surface now hidden beneath a veil of white. Sedatives, a locked satchel, a coach under pressure, the pieces were aligning, but the picture remained incomplete. Valen had motive, perhaps, if Elise had threatened to expose some misconduct. But how did this connect to the silent shot, the groove in the ice? Poirot's little gray cells hummed with possibilities, each one tested and discarded as he sought the thread that would tie them together. Back at the village hall, Poirot found Giraud poring over witness statements, his face etched with frustration. "Nothing," Giraud muttered, tossing a paper aside. "Dozens of people at the lake, yet no one saw the shot fired. It's as if the killer was invisible." Poirot settled into a chair, his notebook open. Invisible Nan. Clever. Oui. The killer used the festivals, chaos, the music, the crowd, the pause in the gramophone. And Valen, he intrigues me. The sedatives, the satchel, what does he hide? Giraud's eyebrows rose. Sedatives. You think he drugged Elise before shooting her? Poirot shook his head. Not drugged, perhaps, but controlled. A man like Valen, he values control above all. If Elise threatened that control, he trailed off, his eyes distant. We must search his chalet, Giraud. The satchel, it holds the key. Giraud hesitated, then nodded. I'll get a warrant. But Poirot, if Valen's our man, how did he manage the shot without being seen? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. That mon ami is what we shall discover. The ice, the groove, the silence, they all speak, if we listen. He closed his notebook with a snap, his resolve unshaken. The mystery of Elise Dubois's death was deepening, but Hercule Poirot was a man who thrived in the shadows of such puzzles. Valen's secret was close, and with it, the truth. Chapter 5. The rivals' alibi. The snow fell steadily over St. Lys, cloaking the village in a hush that seemed to deepen the mystery of Elise Dubois's death. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat dusted with fresh flakes, made his way to the secondary rink where the skating festival had been relocated. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint cheer of the crowd, determined to preserve their tradition despite the tragedy. Poirot's mind, however, was far from the festive mood. The silent shot, the groove in the ice, and the troubling hints of Henry Vallon's secret had sharpened his focus. Now, he turned his attention to Marie Lefevre, Elisa's rival, whose fiery defiance and vague alibi suggested she knew more than she had revealed. The secondary rink, smaller and less grand than the frozen lake, was a flurry of activity. Skaters glided in tight circles, their blades carving intricate patterns, while spectators huddled under woolen blankets, their breath steaming in the cold. Marie was at the rink's center, practicing a series of spins, her emerald costume a vivid contrast to the pale ice. Her movements were fierce, almost desperate, as if she were skating to outrun her grief or her guilt. Poirot stood at the rink's edge, his small figure unobtrusive, yet commanding, his green eyes following her every turn. He noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze flicked nervously toward the crowd, as if searching for an unseen threat. As Marie completed a flawless double axel, she spotted Poirot and slowed, her chest heaving. She skated to the barrier, her expression a mix of defiance and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice sharp, "come to watch me practice, or to accuse me again." Poirot's smile was courteous, his mustache perfectly symmetrical. "Neither, mademoiselle. I come to understand. You are a skater of great talent, yet always in the shadow of Mademoiselle Dubois. That must have been trying for the spirit." Marie's eyes flashed, and she gripped the barrier, her knuckles white. Trying, it was maddening. Elise was untouchable, perfect jumps, perfect smile, perfect everything. But I didn't kill her. I wanted to beat her, not bury her. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "And yet, mademoiselle, you were on the ice when she died. A crowded rink, oui, but your eyes, they are sharp. Did you see nothing unusual? A figure moving strangely, perhaps, or an object out of place?" Marie's gaze faltered, and she looked down at her skates, their blades glinting in the dim light. "It was chaos," she said, her tone less certain. "Skaters weaving, spectators shouting. I was focused on my routine. I heard the scream, but nothing before it." Poirot's pen hovered over his notebook, but he did not write. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her. "Chaos, you say? Yet chaos is where the truth often hides. Permit me to ask, mademoiselle, what did you see near the lake's edge, just before the scream?" Marie's breath caught, and for a moment she seemed to weigh her words. Then, reluctantly, she spoke. I saw Paul Renaud. He was near the pines, where the ice meets the snow. He was bending down, fiddling with something. I don't know. What, a glove? Maybe, or his scarf? I didn't think much of it then." Poirot's eyes gleamed, though his expression remained impassive. "Paul Renaud, at the lake's edge. Most interesting. And you, mademoiselle, you told no one of this? Until now. Why?" Marie's cheeks flushed, and she straightened, her voice regaining its edge. "I didn't think it mattered. Paul's always lurking, watching Elise. Everyone knows he's strange. But I wasn't going to point fingers when I had nothing to do with it." Poirot made a note, his pen moving with deliberate care. "You protect yourself, mademoiselle, and that is natural. But the truth, it is not served by silence. Did you see anyone else? Monsieur Vallon, perhaps? Or another skater?" Marie shook her head, her bun loosening slightly as she did. "No one else stood out. Just Paul. And before you ask, I didn't see any gun, any shot." The music stopped for a moment. Then the scream came, and everything went mad. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging her words. The 10-second pause in the music, confirmed by Claude Moreau, aligned with her account. But her hesitation, her delayed admission about Paul Renothy suggested she was guarding something. Perhaps not guilt, but knowledge. "Mercy, Mademoiselle Lefebvre," he said, his tone gentle. "You have been most helpful. For now, continue your practice. The ice, it is your refuge, Nan." Marie gave him a sharp look, then pushed off, gliding back to the rink's center. Poirot watched her go, noting the intensity of her spins, as if she were trying to erase the weight of suspicion. He turned to the constable, Lefebvre, who had joined him at the barrier, his young face eager. "Monsieur Poirot, do you think she's lying?" the constable asked. Poirot's mustache twitched. "Lying, Nan, but withholding. She sees more than she says, and that is a clue in itself. We must now speak with Monsieur Renaud, to learn what he was fiddling with at the lake's edge." They found Paul Renaud at the edge of the village, near a small cafe, where he sat nursing a cup of coffee, his threadbare coat draped over the chair. His nervous hands twisted a napkin, shredding it into strips, and his eyes darted to Poirot as he approached. "Monsieur Poirot," Paul said, his voice high and unsteady, "I heard you were asking questions. I told you everything yesterday." Poirot settled into a chair opposite, his movements precise. "Not everything, monsieur. Mademoiselle Lefebvre, she places you at the lake's edge, near the pines, just before the scream. You were, how did she say, fiddling with something. What was it?" Paul's face paled, and the napkin tore in his hands. I dropped my glove. I was looking for it in the snow, that's all." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing. "A glove, monsieur? Yet you are a man who watches Mademoiselle Dubois with such devotion. A glove would not distract you from her performance. What did you hold, truly?" Paul's hands trembled, and he looked away, toward the snow-covered street. "It was nothing. A trinket, a locket I'd bought for Elise. I wanted to give it to her after the festival, but I dropped it. I was trying to find it when I heard the scream." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but relentless. "A locket, you say? And where is this locket now?" Paul's shoulders slumped. "I don't know. I couldn't find it. The snow was deep, and then she was gone." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Poirot sat back, his mind worry. A locket, lost in the snow near the pines where the groove in the ice had ended. Was it coincidence, or something more? He made a note, then rose, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Monsieur Renaud. Do not leave the village. We shall speak again." As Poirot stepped back into the cold, he felt the puzzle shifting. Marie's reluctant testimony, Paul's nervous denial, and the locket's mysterious disappearance pointed to a web of secrets. The lake's edge, where the groove vanished, was becoming the focal point of the mystery. He resolved to return there, to search the snow himself. But first, he needed to confer with Giraud at the village hall. Giraud was sorting through a stack of witness statements, his frustration evident. "Poirot," he said, looking up, "we've got nothing new. The villagers saw nothing, heard nothing. It's as if Elise was struck down by a ghost." Poirot settled into a chair, his notebook open. "Not a ghost, mon ami, but a killer with a plan. Mademoiselle Lefebvre saw Renaud at the lake's edge, and he claims he lost a locket. We must search the pines, Judo. The locket, or its absence, may tell us much." Giraud nodded, his skepticism tempered by Poirot's certainty. "I'll send Lefebvre to look. But Poirot, what about Marie? Do you believe her?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "She speaks the truth, but not all of it. Her rivalry with Elise, it is a wound that festers. Yet I do not think she fired the shot. Her role, it is to see, not to act. For now, we follow the locket and the groove." As the snow continued to fall, Poirot's thoughts turned back to the lake. The silent shot, the groove, The pause and the music, these were the threads of a tapestry woven by a careful hand. Marie's alibi, fragile as it was, had pointed to Paul, but Paul's story raised more questions than answers. The truth was close, but it required one more clue to bring it into focus. Poirot adjusted his scarf, his resolve unshaken, and prepared to unravel the next layer of the mystery. Chapter 6. The Spectator's Obsession. The village of St. Lys, now shrouded in a gentle snowfall, seemed to hold its breath as the investigation into Elise Dubois's murder deepened. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes leaving precise imprints in the fresh snow, made his way to the modest apartment of Paul Renaud, the nervous spectator whose devotion to Elise bordered on the fanatical. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and pine, and the distant laughter from the secondary rink felt like an echo from a world untouched by tragedy. Poirot's mind, however, was firmly fixed on the puzzle before him. The silent shot, the groove in the ice, the sedatives in Valen's possession, and now, the curious tale of a lost locket near the pines where the groove had vanished. Paul Renaud, with his trembling hands and evasive answers, was a piece of this puzzle, and Poirot intended to examine him closely. Renaud's apartment was tucked above a small bakery, its windows fogged with condensation. Poirot climbed the narrow staircase, his gloved hand brushing the worn banister, and knocked sharply. The door creaked open to reveal Paul, his wiry frame hunched, his dark eyes darting with unease. The room behind him was cramped, its walls plastered with newspaper clippings and photographs of Elise Dubois, her spins, her smiles, her victories frozen in ink. A single chair set by a rickety table, and on a shelf, half hidden by a stack of books, was a small wooden box that caught Poirot's eye. "Monsieur Renaud," Poirot began, his voice smooth but with an edge of steel, "you are a man of great devotion to Mademoiselle Dubois. Such devotion, it can inspire acts both noble and unwise." Paul's hands twitched, and he stepped back, gesturing for Poirot to enter. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I only admired her. I didn't hurt her." His voice was high, almost pleading, as he sank into the chair, his fingers shredding another napkin. Poirot remained standing, his gaze sweeping the room. The clippings were meticulously arranged, some yellowed with age, others fresh from recent competitions. "Admiration, monsieur, or obsession? These photographs, they are not the work of a casual fan. You followed Mademoiselle Dubois closely, perhaps too closely." Paul's face flushed, and he looked away, toward the fogged window. She was extraordinary. Her skating, it was like poetry. I went to every performance, every practice, but I never spoke to her. I wouldn't dare. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his skepticism. "Yet you were seen at the lake's edge, near the pines, just before her death. You spoke of a locket lost in the snow. A curious moment to lose such a gift, Nan. Tell me, what was this locket, and why was it so important?" Paul's hands stilled, and for a moment he seemed to shrink into himself. "It was a silver locket," he said softly, "engraved with a skate. I bought it months ago, thinking, maybe one day I'd give it to her. I carried it with me, always. During the festival, I was nervous, fumbling with it, and it slipped from my pocket into the snow. I was looking for it when I heard the scream." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind cataloging the details. "And you found nothing? No locket, no trace?" Paul shook his head, his expression anguished. "The snow was deep, and then the crowd started running. I gave up, I swear. That's all I was doing." Poirot moved to the shelf, his gloved hand hovering over the wooden box. "May I, monsieur?" Without waiting for permission, he opened it, revealing a collection of photographs all of Elise, taken from a distance, some through windows or from behind trees. The images were intimate, unguarded, and unsettling. Poirot's voice was low, almost gentle. This, Monsieur Renaud, is not admiration. This is a shrine. You watched her in ways she did not know. Did this watching lead to something more dangerous? Paul leaped to his feet, his voice cracking. No, I loved her talent, her grace. I'd never hurt her. Those photos, they're just memories. I didn't do anything wrong. Poirot closed the box with a soft click, his expression unreadable. Love, monsieur, can twist into darker things. Where were you standing, precisely, when you lost this locket? Paul hesitated, his hands twisting together. Near the pines, by the sound booth. I was trying to get closer to the ice to see her better. Poirot made a note, his pen moving with deliberate precision. The pines, again the same spot where the groove in the ice had ended, and you saw no one else, no one moving strangely, no glint of metal, no sound. Paul shook his head, his eyes wet. Nothing, just the music stopping, then the scream. I looked up, and she was gone. Poirot nodded, his mind worried. Paul's story was consistent. Yet the locket's loss and the photographs suggested a man whose devotion had crossed into obsession. Was he a heartbroken admirer, or a killer hiding behind his tears? Poirot thanked him and left, the snow crunching under his boots as he descended the stairs. The locket, if it existed, was a clue he could not ignore. He resolved to search the pines himself, but first, he needed to confer with Inspector Giraud at the village hall. Giraud was pacing, his mustache bristling with impatience. Poirot, this case is a maze, he said, tossing a stack of witness statements onto the table. No one saw a gun, no one heard a shot, and now you're chasing a locket. Poirot settled into a chair, his notebook open. Not chasing mon ami, but following. The locket, if it exists, was lost where the groove in the ice ended. This is no coincidence. Monsieur Renaud's obsession, it is troubling, but does it make him a murderer? I think not. His passion is too visible. Giraud frowned. Visible. You mean he's too obvious to be the killer? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Precisely. A true killer hides their intent, not their devotion. But Renaud saw something, or knows something, he does not yet reveal. We must search the pines. Giraud, the locket, or its absence, will speak. Giraud sighed, then called for Constable Lefebvre. Take a team to the pines by the sound booth, he ordered. Look for a silver locket, engraved with a skate, and anything else marks, objects, anything out of place. As Lefebvre hurried off, Poirot's thoughts turned to the broader puzzle. The groove, the silent shot, the sedatives, and now the locket all pointed to a killer who planned with meticulous care. Paul's obsession made him a suspect, but his nervous demeanor suggested fear rather than guilt. Marie's reluctant testimony had pointed to him, and Valen's guarded secret loomed large. Yet the method of the murder, the shot fired in a 10-second pause, unheard by a crowd, required a mind, both bold and precise. Poirot closed his notebook, his resolve firm. The truth, mon ami, he said to Giraud. It is like the ice, clear, but slippery. We must tread carefully. Later that evening, Lefebvre returned, his face flushed from the cold. No locket, Monsieur Poirot, he reported. We sifted the snow by the pines, but found only a few twigs and a broken skate lace. The snow's too deep now, with the storm coming. Poirot nodded, undeterred. The absence of the locket, it is as telling as its presence. Either Monsieur Renaud lies, or the killer took it. We must consider both. He rose, adjusting his scarf. Tomorrow, we return to the lake. The ice, it holds more secrets than we have yet uncovered. As he stepped into the snowy night, Poirot's mind churned with possibilities. Paul's obsession was a thread in the tapestry, but it was not the whole picture. The groove, the pause, the sedatives, the pines, these were the clues that would lead to the killer. Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, felt the solution, drawing closer, like a shadow emerging from the snow. Chapter 7. The doping scandal. The snowstorm that had threatened St. Lys arrived with quiet ferocity, blanketing the village in a thick white shroud. By the following morning, Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the biting wind, stood in the village hall, his sharp eyes scanning a map of the frozen lake pinned to the wall. The investigation into Elise Dubois's murder had reached a critical juncture, and Poirot's little gray cells were alight with the threads of the case. The silent shot, the groove in the ice, Paul Renault's lost locket, and the troubling hints of Henry Vallen's secret. The sedatives purchased by the coach, as revealed by Madame Dubois, had cast a shadow over Vallen's claims of innocence, and Poirot was determined to unravel the truth hidden in his guarded demeanor. Inspector Giraud, his face etched with the strain of a case that defied easy answers, joined Poirot at the map, his breath visible in the chilly hall. "This storm's a curse," he muttered, rubbing his hands together. "It's buried any evidence left at the lake. We're no closer to finding that locket, or understanding how the shot went unheard." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his undaunted resolve. "The storm, mon ami, it conceals, but it cannot erase. The truth lies not only in the snow, but in the hearts of those we question. Monsieur Vallen, he holds a secret, and today we shall uncover it." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock, and Madame Leclerc, a festival organizer with a reputation for keen observation, entered the hall. Her gray hair was tucked beneath a woolen cap, and her eyes held a nervous intensity. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "I heard you were asking about Henry Vallen. There's something you should know." Poirot gestured to a chair, his manner courteous, but expectant. "Madame, you have information about the coach. Speak, I beg you. The smallest detail. It may be the key." Madame Leclerc sat, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "A few days before the festival, I overheard Elise arguing with Vallen in the warming tent. It was late, and I was checking the schedules. She was angry, furious. Even she said something about tainted metals and cheating the judges. Vallen tried to calm her, but she threatened to go to the skating committee to tell them everything." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind seizing on the words. Tainted metals, a most serious accusation. "Did she say more, madame? What was Vallen's response?" Madame Leclerc shook her head. "He told her to keep quiet, that it would ruin them, both." She stormed out, and he stayed behind, looking shaken. "I didn't think much of it then, but now—" Her voice trailed off, her eyes wide with realization. Poirot made a note, his pen moving with deliberate care. "Mercy, Madame you have given us a thread to follow. This tainted metals, it suggests a scandal, perhaps one that Monsieur Vallen could not afford to have exposed." As Madame Leclerc left, Giraud turned to Poirot, his skepticism warring with intrigue. "A doping scandal in St. Lys. That's a bold leap, Poirot. Vallen's a respected coach. Would he risk his career?" Poirot's smile was faint, but knowing man's career, mon ami, it is his life. If Elise threatened to destroy it, he might act in desperation. The sedatives from Madame Dubois, they are no coincidence. We must search Vallen's shallah, his satchel, his secrets. They await us." Giraud nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll get a warrant." "But Poirot, if Vallen's our man, how does this connect to the shot, the groove?" Poirot's gaze was distant, his mind piecing together the fragments. "That, we shall discover. The scandal, it is the motive. The method, it is the mystery. Let us proceed with order and method." By mid-morning, the warrants secured, Poirot and Giraud arrived at Vallen's chalet, accompanied by Constable Lefebvre. The snow had piled high against the door, and Vallen opened it with a scowl, his broad frame tense. "What is this?" he demanded, his pale blue eyes narrowing. You've no right to barge in here. Giraud held up the warrant, his voice firm. We've every right, Valen. Stand aside. Valen stepped back, his hands clenched, as Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room. The leather satchel still sat on the table, its presence a silent challenge. Poirot moved to it, but Valen intercepted, his voice sharp. That's private. You'll find nothing but training logs. Poirot's mustache twitched. Private, oui, but secrets, they are. Not safe from Hercule Poirot. With Giraud's nod, Lefebvre opened the satchel, revealing a collection of papers, a stopwatch, and a small key. Poirot's gaze fixed on the key, its brass surface glinting in the firelight. And this, monsieur? What does it open? Valen's face paled, but he said nothing. Poirot's eyes swept the room, landing on a locked cabinet in the corner, its wood polished but unadorned. Constable, he said, open it. Lefebvre inserted the key, and the cabinet swung open, to reveal a collection of vials, each labeled in Valen's precise handwriting. The labels read E.D. Elise Dubois listed a banned performance-enhancing drug. Beside the vials were syringes and a notebook detailing dosages and dates. The last entry just days before the festival. Giraud's eyes widened. Mon Dieu, Poirot, doping. You were right. Valen sank into a chair, his composure crumbling. It's not what you think, he said, his voice hoarse. The supplements, they were legal at first. Elise wanted to compete at the highest level, and I helped her. But then, the rules changed, and she wanted to stop. She said she'd expose me if I didn't agree. Poirot's voice was soft, but unrelenting. And this exposure, monsieur, it would have ruined you. Your career, your reputation gone. A powerful motive, none. Valen's hands trembled violently now, and he buried his face in them. I didn't kill her. Yes, I was scared. She was going to the committee, and I begged her to reconsider. But I didn't shoot her. I was in the warming tent. I swear it. Poirot's gaze was piercing. The warming tent, where no one saw you. The sedatives, the drugs, the argument, these paint a picture, Monsieur Valen. But the truth, it requires more. Where were you when the music paused, when the scream came? Valen looked up, his eyes desperate. I told you in the tent. I heard the scream and ran out. I didn't hear a shot, I swear. Poirot made a note, his pen steady. We shall see, monsieur. For now, you will remain here. The little gray cells, they are not yet satisfied. As they left the chalet, the snow swirling around them, Giraud shook his head. Doping Poirot. It's motive, but it's not proof. How does this fit with the silent shot? Poirot adjusted his scarf, his mind alight. The scandal, it is the why. The shot, the groove, the pause, these are the how. Valen had reason to fear Elise, but did he have the means to kill her so cleverly? We must return to the Lake Giraud. The ice, it holds the final clue. Back at the hall, Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open. He sketched the lake again, marking the pines, the sound booth, and the groove's path. The doping scandal gave Valen a motive, but the method a shot fired in a 10-second pause, unheard by a crowd, required a precision that Valen's trembling hands might belie. Paul's locket, Marie's testimony, the sedatives, all were threads, but the tapestry was incomplete. Poirot closed his eyes, letting the facts settle. The truth was near, hidden in the silence of the shot and the secrets of the ice. Chapter 8. The groove in the ice. The snowstorm had abated by the following morning, leaving St. Lys under a crystalline blanket that glittered in the weak sunlight. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat impeccable despite the cold, stood once more at the edge of the frozen lake, his sharp green eyes tracing the cordoned-off expanse where Elise Dubois had met her end. The air was still, the festival's music now, a distant hum from the secondary rink, and the village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth to emerge. Poirot's mind was a whirl of fragments. The silent shot. The doping scandal uncovered in Henry Valent's chalet. Paul Renault's obsessive locket, and Marie Lefever's reluctant testimony. Yet it was the groove in the ice, that faint, deliberate mark, trailing from Elise's body to the pines that held his attention now. It was a clue, he was certain. That would unlock the method of the murder. Inspector Giraud joined him, his heavy boots crunching through the fresh snow, his face etched with the weariness of a case that seemed to defy resolution. "Poirot," he said, his breath clouding in the frigid air, "this lake is a graveyard of clues. The snow's buried everything. What do you hope to find?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his unshaken resolve. "The snow, mon ami, it conceals, but the ice, it remembers. This groove, it is no accident. It speaks of a killer who planned with care, who wished to mislead us. We must follow it again, and this time we shall listen." With Constable Lefevre at their side, his youthful eagerness undimmed by the cold, they crossed the ice, their steps careful to avoid disturbing the cordoned area. The chalk outline of Elise's body was faintly visible beneath a dusting of snow, and the groove, though softened by the storm, remained discernibly a thin, straight line stretching toward the pines at the lake's western edge. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass catching the sunlight as he examined the mark. "See here," he said, pointing to the groove's edges. "It is too fine for a skate, too precise for a random scratch. It was made by a tool, perhaps metal, dragged with intent." Lefevre, ever eager, ventured a suggestion. "Could it be a rod, monsieur? Like a fishing pole or something a coach might use?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with approval. "A rod, oui, or something similar. Not heavy, but rigid. Enough to drag a body, or to create the illusion of one." He stood, his gaze following the groove's path. "Let us see where it leads, once more." They traced the mark across the ice, the snow crunching softly underfoot. The groove ended, as before, at the cluster of pines, where the snow was deeper, disturbed by the wind and the previous day's search for Paul's locket. Poirot knelt again, sifting through the snow with gloved hands, his movements meticulous. After a moment, his fingers brushed against something hard and cold, a small metal case, partially buried beneath the pine's low branches. He lifted it, carefully, brushing off the snow to reveal a scratched but intact silencer, its cylindrical form unmistakable. Giraud's eyes widened. "Mon Dieu, Poirot, a silencer. That explains the silent shot." Poirot turned the object in his hands, his expression grave. "Oui, mon ami. A silencer, used to muffle the shot, fired in the 10-second pause of the music. The killer, they were, clever, bold, yet invisible." He examined the silencer closely, noting a faint residue of oil on its surface. "This oil, it is not common. It smells of machinery, perhaps, or skate maintenance." Lefevre, his face alight with excitement, pointed to the pines. "It was hidden here, near where Renaud said he lost his locket. Could he have dropped this instead?" Poirot shook his head, his mind racing. "Non, Constable. Renaud, he is too nervous, too open in his obsession. This silencer belongs to a mind more disciplined, more calculating." He paused, his thoughts turning to Valen. "The oil, it may connect to the chalet, to the tools of a coach." Giraud frowned, clutching the silencer in a handkerchief. Valen again. "The doping scandal, the sedatives, and now this. It's piling up, Poirot, but we need more than clues. We need proof." Poirot's smile was faint but confident. "Proof, mon ami, is what the little gray cells assemble. The silencer, it confirms the method a shot fired in silence, timed with precision. The groove, it suggests the body was moved, or staged, to confuse us. But the motive, it lies with Valen's fear of exposure." They returned to the village hall, the silencer carefully wrapped and entrusted to Lefebvre for safekeeping. Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open, sketching the lake once more. He marked the groove's path, the pines, and the sound booth's position, his mind weaving the clues together. The silencer was a breakthrough, but it raised new questions. How had the killer accessed such a device in a quiet village like St. Lys? And why stage the body so far from the pines, where the groove ended? Poirot, pacing, as usual, broke the silence. If Valin used a silencer, he must have a firearm. We didn't find one in his chalet. Poirot nodded, his pen pausing. True, but a firearm, it can be hidden or discarded. The lake, the snow, the pines, they offer many hiding places. We must search Valin's chalet again, and we must question him further. His hands, they tremble with more than nerves. That afternoon, they returned to Valin's chalet, armed with a new warrant. Valin greeted them with a scowl, his broad frame tense as he stood in the doorway. Again, he said, his voice edged with anger. You've already torn through my things. What more do you want? Poirot's voice was calm, but unyielding. The truth, Monsieur Valin. We have found a silencer, hidden near the pines, where the groove in the ice ended. A silencer, coated with oil like that, used for skate maintenance. Such oil, it is found. In your chalet, Nan. Valin's face paled, and he stepped back, his hands clenching. A silencer. I don't know anything about that. I sharpen skates. Yes, but I don't own a gun. Poirot's eyes narrowed, noting the tremor in Valin's hands. Perhaps not now, monsieur, but in the past. A man of your discipline, he might have hunted, or kept a weapon for protection. Valin shook his head, his voice rising. I told you, I was in the warming tent. I didn't shoot Elise. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. Poirot gestured to Lefebvre, who began a thorough search of the chalet. The constable checked behind furniture, under floorboards, and in the chimney, but found no firearm. Poirot, however, focused on a small toolbox near the skates, its contents including a vial of oil matching the scent on the silencer. This oil, monsieur, he said, holding up the vial, it is distinctive. It links the silencer to you, Valin's. Shoulders slumped, but his voice remained defiant. I used that oil for skates, like every coach. It proves nothing. Poirot made a note, his pen steady. For now, monsieur, it is a thread. And threads, they weave a noose. He thanked Valin and left, the snow crunching under his boots as he stepped into the fading light. Back at the hall, Poirot sat with Poirot, the silencer on the table between them. The groove, the silencer, the oil, they point to Valin. Poirot said, his voice low. Yet the firearm, it is missing. The killer, they are clever, but not perfect. We must look to the lake again, Poirot. The ice, it has one more secret to reveal. As the day drew to a close, Poirot's mind churned with possibilities. The doping scandal gave Valin motive. The silencer and oil suggested means, but the opportunity, how had he fired the shot unseen? The groove, the pause, the pines, these were the final pieces, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. The truth was close, hidden in the silence of the shot and the secrets of the ice. Chapter 9. The 10-second pause, the village hall of St. Lys. Its stone walls, echoing with the faint crackle of the hearth, was a somber stage as Hercule Poirot prepared to confront the suspects in the murder of Elise Dubois. The snow outside had settled into a crystalline hush, and the festival's distant music from the secondary rink seemed a world away. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his small frame commanding despite the rustic surroundings, his green eyes sharp with the clarity of a mind that had pieced together the puzzle's edges. The silencer found near the pines, coated with skate maintenance oil, had confirmed the method of the silent shot, and the doping scandal uncovered in Henry Valin's chalet had revealed a motive. Yet the final thread, the how and the who, required a dramatic unveiling to coax the truth from the shadows. Inspector Giraud, his mustache twitching with anticipation, had gathered the three primary suspects, Marie Lefebvre, Henry Vallon, and Paul Renaud. They sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a study in contrasts: Marie's defiant glare, Vallon's guarded composure, and Paul's nervous fidgeting. The room was heavy with expectation, the air thick with the weight of unspoken secrets. Poirot, his notebook closed for once, clasped his hands behind his back and began to speak, his voice calm but resonant, in the manner of one who holds the stage. "Mies Amos," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "The murder of Elise Dubois was no act of impulse, no crime of passion. It was a performance, meticulously planned, executed with the precision of a skater's spin. A shot fired in a crowded festival, yet unheard. A body placed on the ice, yet showing no signs of struggle. A groove leading to the pines, yet ending in mystery. These are the elements of a puzzle, and now the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot have assembled them." Marie shifted in her seat, her emerald costume catching the firelight. Vallon's hands, usually steady, trembled slightly, and Paul's eyes darted to the door, as if longing to flee. Poirot continued, his tone measured but relentless. "Let us begin with the method. The shot that killed Mademoiselle Dubois was fired during a 10-second pause in the festival's music, a moment when the gramophone fell silent. This pause, confirmed by Monsieur Moreau, the sound technician, was the killer's window. But a gunshot, even in a crowd, it makes a sound unless muffled by a silencer." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. Giraud held up the metal case, its scratched surface glinting in the dim light. Marie gasped, a sharp intake of breath, while Vallon's face remained impassive, and Paul's hands twisted his scarf into knots. "This silencer," Poirot said, "was found near the pines, where the groove in the ice ended. It was coated with oil used for skate maintenance oil, found in the chalet of Monsieur Vallon." Vallon stood, his voice rough with indignation. "I told you, that oil is common. Every coach uses it. You can't prove I touched that thing." Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene. "Patience, monsieur. We shall come to proof. But first, the groove. This mark, so fine, so deliberate, was no accident. It was made by a tula rod, perhaps, used to drag or position the body, to create the illusion that Mademoiselle Dubois fell where she was shot. Yet the ice around her was pristine, with no signs of struggle. This suggests the body was moved, staged to deceive." Marie's eyes widened, and she leaned forward. "Moved? You mean she wasn't killed in the center of the lake?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his satisfaction. "Exactement, mademoiselle. The killer shot her elsewhere near the pines, perhaps, where the groove began, then placed her body to mislead us. But why? To hide the true location of the crime, to obscure the killer's path." Paul's voice broke the silence, high and strained. "I was at the pines, looking for my locket. I didn't see anything like that. I swear it." Poirot turned to him, his gaze piercing. "Your locket, Monsieur Renaud. It is a curious detail. Lost in the snow, you say, yet we found no locket, only a silencer. Perhaps you dropped something else, or perhaps you saw more than you admit. But let us move to motive, for it is here that the truth begins to shine." He paced slowly, his steps deliberate, as the suspects watched, their tension palpable. Mademoiselle Dubois was a star, but stars cast shadows. Mademoiselle Lefebvre, your rivalry was fierce. You believed Elise cheated, perhaps with help that gave her an edge. Yet your anger, it is open, not hidden. A killer, they conceal their intent. Marie's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing, her hands clenched in her lap. Poirot turned to Paul. "Monsieur Renaud, your devotion to Elise was excessive. Your photographs, your constant watching these, suggest a passion that could turn dangerous. Yet, your grief, it is too raw, too visible for a calculated crime." Paul's eyes filled with tears, and he looked away, unable to meet Poirot's gaze. Finally, Poirot faced Vallon, his voice soft but unyielding. Monsieur Vallon, you had the most to lose. Elise discovered your doping scheme, tainted metals, as she called them. She threatened to expose you to the skating committee, to ruin your career. This fear, it is a powerful motive, Nan. Vallon's face darkened, and he stood again, his voice shaking. I admitted to the supplements, yes, but I didn't kill her. I was in the warming tent, not at the Pines. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The warming tent, so close to the lake, yet so convenient an alibi. The silencer, coated with your oil. The groove, made by a tool, like those in your chalet. And the sedative's chloral hydrate, enough to calm a horse, purchased days before. The murder. These are not coincidences, monsieur. Vallon's hands trembled violently now, and he sank back into his chair, his defiance crumbling. I didn't shoot her. I couldn't. She was my star. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and commanding. You feared her, monsieur Vallon. She held your future in her hands. During the 10-second pause, you fired the shot, muffled by the silencer. You used a rod perhaps for skate sharpening, to drag her body to the center of the lake, creating the groove to mislead us. You staged her death as an accident, but the ice, it betrayed you. Marie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Paul stared, his scarf forgotten, while Vallon's face drained of color. You have no proof, Vallon whispered, his voice barely audible. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Proof, monsieur, is in the details. The oil on the silencer matches your chalet. The groove aligns with your tools, and your motive it burns brighter than all others. You killed Elise Dubois, to silence her, to protect your secrets. The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire, the only sound. Giraud stepped forward, his face grim. Henry Vallon, you're under arrest for the murder of Elise Dubois. Vallon's shoulders slumped, and he offered no resistance as Lefava handcuffed him. Marie rose, her eyes wet with tears, and Paul slipped out, his face a mask of shock. Poirot watched them go, his expression somber but satisfied. The puzzle was nearly complete, but one final piece, the confession dash, remained. As Vallon was led away, Poirot turned to Giraud. The little gray cells, mon ami, they see what others miss. But we must hear his story, to be certain. The truth was close, and Poirot felt the quiet thrill of a mystery unraveling. The 10-second pause had been the killer's stage, and Vallon, with his fear and his secrets, had played the leading role. Chapter 10. The Confession. The village hall of St. Lys, its stone walls steeped in the lingering warmth of the dying fire, was a somber arena as the investigation into Elise Dubois's murder reached its climax. The snow outside had settled into a quiet veil, muffling the distant strains of the skating festivals, music, and casting a hush over the village. Hercule Poirot stood by the hearth, his small figure radiating an authority that belied his stature. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, were fixed on Henry Vallon, who sat handcuffed in a wooden chair, his broad shoulders slumped, and his weathered face pale with defeat. Inspector Giraud stood nearby, his mustache bristling with a mix of triumph and exhaustion, while Constable Lefebvre guarded the door, his youthful face taut with the gravity of the moment. The silencer, the groove in the ice, the doping scandal all had pointed to Vallon, and now Poirot sought the final piece of the puzzle, the confession that would lay bare the truth. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the faint creak of Vallon's chair as he shifted uncomfortably. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his voice calm but resonant, carrying the weight of certainty. Monsieur Vallon, he began, the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot have unraveled the mystery of Elise Dubois's death. The evidence, it is overwhelming. The silencer found near the Pines, coated with oil from your chalet. The groove in the ice, made by a tool you possess. The doping scandal, which Mademoiselle Dubois threatened to expose. These are not mere threads, monsieur. They are a noose. Yet, I offer you this moment to speak the truth. Why did you kill her? Valen's hands, bound by cuffs, trembled violently, and his pale blue eyes darted to the floor, avoiding Poirot's gaze. I didn't, he started, his voice hoarse, but the words faltered, and he fell silent, his breath uneven. Poirot stepped closer, his tone gentle, but unrelenting. Monsieur, denial serves no purpose. The facts, they are clear. Elise was your star. But also your undoing. She discovered your use of banned substances stanozolo, hidden in your chalet, and threatened to reveal this to the skating committee. Such a revelation would have ended your career, your reputation. You could not allow this, could you? Valen's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a mix of fear and defiance. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. It wasn't just about me. It was about her, to her medals, her victories. If she talked, everything we built would be gone. She'd be stripped of her titles, shamed. I was protecting her. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his focus. Protecting her, monsieur, by silencing her with a bullet. Nan, this was not protection. This was fear of ruin. Tell me, how did you do it? The shot, the silencer, the groove, how? Did you orchestrate this tragedy? Valen's shoulders sagged, and he buried his face in his hands, the cuffs clinking softly. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the words that would confirm Poirot's deductions. After a long moment, Valen spoke, his voice low and ragged. I didn't mean for it to happen, he whispered. It wasn't planned, not at first, Elise. She came to me the day before the festival, furious. She'd found the vials in my cabinet, realized what I'd been giving her. She called it cheating, said she'd go to the committee, tell them everything. I begged her to reconsider, told her it would destroy us both. She wouldn't listen. Poirot nodded, his expression somber. And so, you acted. How, monsieur? Tell us of the moment. Valen's eyes were distant, as if reliving the scene. The festival, it was chaotic, the perfect cover. I knew the music would pause. Claude always changed the records around. 3. I had an old hunting rifle, from years ago, and a silencer I'd kept from my time in the army. I waited near the pines, where the crowd was thin. Elise was skating near the edge, practicing alone. When the music stopped, I called her over, said I needed to talk. She came, still angry, and I panicked. I shot her, just once, with the silencer. She fell, and no one heard. Chiro's eyes widened, but he remained silent, letting Poirot lead. Poirot's voice was steady, and the body, monsieur. It was found in the center of the lake, far from the pines. How did you manage this? Valen swallowed, his voice barely audible. I used a skate sharpening rod, long and thin. I hooked it under her costume and dragged her across the ice, keeping low so no one would see. The groove was from the rod. I placed her in the center, where everyone would think she'd been shot while skating. I threw the silencer into the snow by the pines, hoping it would be buried. The rifle, I hid it in the woods, under a fallen log. Poirot made a note, his pen moving with deliberate precision. The rifle, we shall find it. But the sedatives, Monsieur Valen, why? So many. Did you plan to subdue her first? Valen shook his head, his face crumpling. No. The sedatives were for me. The pressure, the fear, it was eating me alive. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think. I bought them to calm my nerves, nothing more. Poirot's gaze softened, though his resolve remained firm. You killed not for hatred, monsieur, but for survival. Yet murder, it is never the answer. You betrayed Elise, your star, and yourself. Valen's head bowed, and a sob escaped him. the sound raw and broken. I didn't want to lose everything. She was going to take it all away. Giraud stepped forward, his voice firm. Henry Vallon, you'll come with us. The magistrate will hear your confession. He signaled to Lefebvre, who led Vallon from the room, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor, as the door closed. Poirot turned to Giraud, his expression grave. The puzzle, mon ami, it is complete. The silencer, the groove, the doping scandal all led to Vallon. Yet the heart, it is heavy. He loved Elise, in his way, but fear, it is a cruel master. Giraud nodded, his face etched with relief. You did it, Poirot. The little gray cells, they never fail. But the rifle, we need to find it to seal the case. Poirot's smile was faint. And we shall. Send Lefebvre to the woods, to the fallen log, Vallon described. The rifle, it will be there, buried in the snow. As Giraud issued orders, Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open, but untouched. The confession had confirmed his deductions, yet the tragedy of it lingered. Vallon's fear had driven him to a desperate act, a single shot fired in a 10-second pause that ended a life and a legacy. The ice had held its secrets, but Poirot's relentless pursuit had brought them to light. The case was nearly closed, but the village of St. Lys would carry the scar of this murder long after the snow melted. Chapter 11. The aftermath. The snow had ceased falling over St. Lys, leaving the village in a serene, almost reverent silence as the skating festival drew to its close. The secondary rink, now emptying of skaters and spectators, cast a faint glow across the snow-dusted streets, its music fading into the night. Hercule Poirot sat with Inspector Giraud on a bench by the frozen lake. The cordoned-off expanse, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. The chalk outline of Elise Dubois's body was now buried under fresh snow, but the memory of her death lingered, a shadow over the village's festive spirit. Poirot's overcoat was buttoned tightly against the evening chill, his scarf knotted with geometric precision, yet his mind was far from the cold. Henry Vallon's confession had solved the puzzle, but the weight of the truth pressed heavily on Poirot's heart. The firelight from a nearby bonfire flickered across Giraud's face, illuminating the lines of exhaustion etched there. It's over, Poirot, he said, his voice gruffed but relieved. Vallon's in custody, and Lefebvre's searching the woods for the rifle. You were right, the silencer, the groove, the doping scandal. It all pointed to him. But how did you know? Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. The little gray cells, mon ami, they see what others miss. The groove. In the ice, it was too deliberate, too fine for a skate. It spoke of a tool, a plan. The silencer, coated with Vallon's oil, confirmed the silent shot, timed to the 10-second pause in the music. And the motive was in his sphere. Elise's threat to expose his doping scheme. It was a wound to his pride, his life's work. Giraud leaned back, his breath clouding in the frosty air. Still, it's a grim business. Vallon loved her, in his way. To kill her like that, to stage it on the ice. It's cold, even for a coach. Poirot nodded, his gaze fixed on the lake, its surface a mirror of stars under the clearing sky. The human heart, Giraud, it is a complex thing. Vallon saw Elise as his creation, his triumph. Yet when she turned against him, his fear was greater than his love. It is a tragedy, not only for her, but for him. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackle of the bonfire the only sound. Poirot's thoughts drifted to the suspects left behind. Marie Lefebvre, her rivalry with Elise, now a bittersweet memory, had returned to the rink, her spins a defiant reclaiming of her passion. Paul Renaud, his obsession unfulfilled, had vanished into the village. His shrine of photographs, a testament to a love that could never be. Both were free, yet marked by the shadow of Elise's death. Giraud broke the silence, his voice curious. The silencer, Poirot. How did you know it was there? By the pines. Poirot's eyes gleamed, reflecting the firelight. The groove, mon ami, it led us there. Its path was too precise, ending where the snow could hide a secret. And Paul's tale of the locket, it drew my attention to the pines. The silencer, it was the killer's mistake, a thing discarded in haste, yet not buried deep enough. Gilles shook his head, a grudging admiration in his expression. And the sedatives. You thought they were part of the murder at first. Poirot's smile was rueful, a misstep perhaps. The sedatives were Valen's crutch, not his weapon, but they revealed his state of mind, his fear, his desperation. The little gray cells, they sometimes wander, but they always return to the truth. A shout from the woods interrupted their conversation. Constable Lefebvre emerged, his face flushed with excitement, holding a wrapped bundle. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, he called, hurrying toward them. We found a rifle, hidden under a log, just as Valens said. It's old, but it matches the caliber of the bullet. Giraud clapped Lefebvre on the shoulder, his relief palpable. Good work, lad. That seals it. Valens' confession, the silencer, the rifle, theirs, no doubt now. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with care. The case is closed. Yet, the heart, it feels no triumph. Elise Dubois, she was a star, and stars should not fall so soon. As they walked back to the village hall, the bonfire's glow faded behind them, and the lake lay quiet, its secrets revealed. Poirot's mind, ever active, replayed the case. The 10-second pause, the groove, the silencer, the doping scandal. Each clue had been a step toward the truth, guided by his unerring instinct. But the village of St. Lys would not soon forget the tragedy that had marred its festival, nor the man who had unraveled it. In the hall, Poirot sat to write his final notes, the fire casting long shadows across his notebook. The mystery of the frozen lake was solved, but its echoes would linger in the tears of Marie, the silence of Paul, and the broken dreams of Valen. Poirot closed his notebook, his thoughts turning to the train that would carry him back to Paris. The case was over, but the world, he knew, held countless puzzles yet to be solved. Chapter 12. The departure. The morning sun broke over St. Lys with a tentative warmth, casting a pale golden glow across the snow-laden village. The frozen lake, now free of its cordon but empty of skaters, shimmered like a polished mirror, its surface bearing no trace of the tragedy that had unfolded. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the village square, his overcoat immaculate and his hat tilted at its customary angle, his small valise at his feet. The skating festival had ended the previous evening, its final notes fading into a quiet that seemed to mourn Elise Dubois. Henry Valen's confession, the discovery of the rifle, and the silencer's damning evidence had closed the case. Yet, Poirot felt no triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved and a truth revealed. Inspector Giraud joined him, his heavy coat dusted with snow from an early morning patrol. His face, usually stern, carried a rare softness, a grudging respect for the diminutive detective who had unraveled the mystery. You're off, then, Poirot, he said, his breath clouding in the crisp air. Back to Paris, to your warm apartment, and your tisanes. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile curling his lips. Oui, mon ami. The train, it awaits, and Hercule Poirot, he longs for the order and comfort of civilization. But St. Lys, it has left its mark. A case so complex, yet so human. Giraud nodded, his eyes drifting to the lake. Valen's in custody, the rifles with the magistrate, and the village is trying to move on. But it won't forget Ellis or you. You saw what we missed, Poirot. How do you do it? Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his gaze distant. The little gray cells, Giraud. They observe, they question, they arrange. The groove in the ice, it whispered of a tool. The silencer, of a plan. The doping scandal, of a motive born of fear. Each clue, it is a piece of the mosaic, And I, Hercule Poirot, I see the whole. They walked toward the small train station at the village's edge, the snow crunching under their boots. The platform was quiet, save for a few villagers bundled against the cold, their faces marked by the weight of recent events. Poirot's thoughts drifted to the figures left behind. Marie Lefebvre, skating with renewed determination, her rivalry with Elise, now a bittersweet spur. Paul Renaud, whose obsession had crumbled into solitude, his shrine of photographs abandoned, and Valin, whose fear had driven him to a desperate act, now faced the consequences in a cell. Giraud broke the silence, his voice curious. What was the key, Poirot? The one thing that made it all clear. Poirot paused, his eyes reflecting the lake's distant gleam. The silence, mon ami. The 10-second pause in the music hit was the killer's stage. Valin knew the festival's rhythm, knew when the crowd would be distracted. The silencer, the groove, they were his props. But the pause, it was his moment. Without it, I might have faltered. Zero shook his head. A wry smile, tugging at his lips. You falter. Never. You're a confounded nuisance, Poirot, but you're the best there is. The train's whistle pierced the air, and steam billowed from the engine as it pulled into the station. Poirot picked up his valise, his movements precise. Merci, Giraud. But the best, they are only as good as the truth they seek. Saint Lys. It has taught me once more that the heart, it can betray as surely as it loves. He boarded the train, settling into a plush seat by the window. As the engine chugged to life, the village receded, its snow-covered roofs and quiet lake fading into the distance. Poirot opened his notebook, its pages filled with a neat script. Of the case, the groove, the silencer, the doping scandal, the confession. He added a final note, his pen moving with deliberate care. The truth. It is found in the silence, where the heart speaks loudest. The train rattled through the snowy countryside, carrying Poirot back to Paris, to the warmth of his apartment and the promise of new puzzles. The mystery of the frozen lake was closed, but the world, he knew, was full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. His mustache curled slightly, and he closed his notebook, ready for the next challenge that awaited Hercule Poirot.